All right, guys, so what we're going to be talking about here is just kind of an extension of what we talked about previously with the chain rule. And that is what happens when we need to use the chain rule and the product and the quotient rule are already, like, you look at a problem, you're like, okay, that looks like a product or a quotient rule. Now, in order to do that, the one thing that I do want to just remind you of real quickly is what both the product and the quotient rule are. Remember, when we have the product rule, that says we have two different functions that are multiplying together, and we want to take the derivative of those two functions multiplying together. And it's not as easy as just taking the derivative of each function individually. Instead, we write the first function down, then we multiply by the derivative of the second function. Plus, we take the second function and write it down, and then multiply by the derivative of the first function. The other, and again, that's the product rule, and we're just going over these real quickly again. For the quotient rule, we have f of x divided by g of x. We have a function in a fraction that's on the top and the bottom. This is our quotient rule here. And remember, the quotient rule says we take what's on the bottom, and we multiply that by the derivative of what's on the top, minus what's on the top times the derivative of what's on the bottom, and then we put all of that over the bottom squared. Now you might be asking, okay, why do we need to talk about those? We've discussed them previously. When we start looking at problems that involve the product rule and the chain rule together, it becomes a little bit more difficult to know what to do when. And so really what you should do every single time is you should ask yourself, okay, in this problem, is the thing that's happening overall, are the things that we're looking at, are they multiplying? Are they dividing? Or is the entire problem being raised to a number power? Now, what we looked at last time was just examples where the entire problem was being raised to a number power, so it became really easy to use the chain rule because it was pretty much the same thing every single time. But if we look at a problem, and this is just number one from your assignment, but if we look at a problem like this, all of a sudden it's like, oh no, there's a bunch of different stuff going on. But if we look at this, we've got this first function right here, that's my f of x, it is multiplying, f of x right there, it is multiplying g of x right here. Okay, so there's f of x, there's g of x, those two things are multiplying together. And what you have to ask yourself is, okay, overall, what is happening? Well, I can see that these two problems are, or those two functions are multiplying together, so I am going to apply the product rule to try and find the derivative. Now again, and I know a lot of people want to skip through these because they're like, okay, I know what I'm doing. Make sure, there are 4 parts to the product rule. Make sure that you write down all 4 parts, one part at a time, rather than looking for the entire answer all at once. That's generally where people get in trouble when they're trying to apply the product rule and the chain rule together, is they just forget things. So when we do this, the first thing we always do is write down f of x. So I've got 2x to the 5th plus 3. Then I'm going to multiply that by the derivative of g of x. Okay, so again, this is f of x right here. I'm going to multiply by the derivative of g of x. Well, in order to take the derivative of g of x, I need to use the chain rule. So this is where the chain rule comes in, like we talked about previously, where I get 4 times x squared plus 4 to the 3rd power. And then I need to multiply that by the derivative of the inside, so that whole thing is my g prime of x. Plus, now I write down g of x, and I multiply that by the derivative of f of x. Now this time, with f of x, I don't need to apply the chain rule because I just have a function. I just have 2x to the 5th plus 3. I know how to take the derivative of that. That's 10x to the 4th. So again, what I have here is g of x times f prime of x. I have found all 4 pieces that I would need to use the product rule. So in this case, that is my final answer. I don't need to simplify it down. I don't need to distribute. I just have that as my final answer. And again, hopefully that kind of makes sense as to why that is what it is. Let's try one more, this time with a quotient rule, to make sure that we understand how this works when we're looking at a problem like this one. Now again, the question you should ask yourself is, what is happening overall here? Is there a division problem? Is there a multiplication problem? Or is everything being raised to a number power? In this case, hopefully you can see that this is a division problem. So in our division problem, we say, okay, I'm going to take what's on the bottom, because we're using the quotient rule, and I'm just going to write it down. That's the first step. Then I'm going to multiply that by the derivative of what's on top. Now again, just like in the previous example, this is where I have to use my chain rule to take the derivative. And all of these answers are incredibly long. Okay, that's just how these problems work themselves out. Then I go minus, I write down exactly what's on the top, and I multiply that by the derivative of what is on the bottom. Then we put all of that over the bottom squared. And that is our answer to that particular problem. Again, focusing on the fact that here's my g of x, here's my f prime of x, here's my f of x, and here is my g prime of x. And then all of that is over g of x squared. Hopefully you can kind of see, I know this is a fairly short video, but hopefully you can kind of see where it is that we use the chain rule. It's not one comes before the other. You have to look at the problem and say, what is happening overall, and when am I going to apply each of these different rules based on how the problem is set up? If you have any other questions about this, please let me know. I know the chain rule can be a little bit intimidating sometimes.